See if there's a light on this. You okay? Hey, good evening, everybody. If I can invite us to take our seats and begin. Good evening and welcome. My name is James Rondo, and I'm the president and Eloise W. Martin director of the Art Institute of Chicago. And it's a great privilege to be here this evening, to be part of this event. So this keynote lecture tonight by the very distinguished George Shackelford, about whom you'll hear more in a moment, it launches the public element of our symposium, A New Lens on 19th Century Art, a program that will be continued with an array of surely insightful speakers in Rubloff Auditorium, commencing at 10:45 a.m. tomorrow morning. As I think we all know, when this museum was founded in the late 19th century, Impressionism was the advanced art of that moment. Our world-class collection of 19th century art today, that we hold here with such pride, is due to the vision of committed and forward-looking collectors of that moment. As a museum today, our Impressionist legacy, as much as our strengths in modern and contemporary art, remind us that we have always been a museum that actively engages the present tense and has rarely been unwilling to venture into new territories, indeed, to lead the field. But these ambitions, I'm reminded, come with serious responsibilities. It is crucial to put resources toward learning as much as we can about the works of art in our care, and we must train the next generation of art historians and curators to find new and meaningful ways to interpret collections, and in this process, to remain relevant to developing new audiences. Our quite brilliant exhibition, Van Gogh Bedrooms, powerfully demonstrates how very wise scientists and very wise curators, and I want to pause just for a moment to acknowledge all of my curatorial and conservation colleagues in the room tonight and to thank them for their work ongoing, particularly for their engagement in this symposium, and for those of you who worked particularly on Van Gogh. We owe you a great debt. But so wise scientists and talented curators can ask new questions of artworks that we thought we knew intimately, to discover that we did not, and then to animate them in ways that inspire wonder and curiosity, urging us all to dig deeper, to look beneath the surface, and in that process, if we're doing our jobs right, empowering museum goers for generations to come. So with this, I pass the stage to my very talented colleague, curator of Van Gogh's Bedrooms, Gloria Groom, who will introduce George Shackelford. Thank you.
I have to put these on now. Good evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce a dear friend and colleague, George Shackelford, as our keynote speaker for this public symposium on art and technology. Although he has held since 2011 the title of Deputy Director at the Kimbell Museum of Art in Fort Worth, he continues to be a very positive force in the curatorial realm. In Boston, where he was chair of the Department of the Art of Europe, he made a number of acquisitions, both stunning and very bold. And I'll go back to this one because we probably want to look at that one. In Boston, he also organized groundbreaking exhibitions on Gauguin in Tahiti and Degas in the Nude with the Musée d'Orsay, among others such as Monet in the 20th Century, Van Gogh Face to Face, Impressionist Still Lifes, and closer to home in 1988-1999, the Mary Cassatt Modern Woman, co-organized with the Art Institute. A graduate of Dartmouth and with a PhD from Yale, George began his prestigious career as the David F. Finley Fellow of the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, before moving to Houston, where he was curator at the Museum of Fine Arts beginning in 1984. His list of awards and fellowships is impressive and stretches across the Atlantic, where he has been elected to the Chevalier in the Ordre des Arts et Lettres by the Republic of France, and in 2012 bestowed Officier in the same order. At the Kimbell Art Museum, he continues to energize and innovate, most recently with the exhibition Gustav Caillebotte, Painter's Eye, which he co-organized with Mary Morton at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and which, as you'll remember, we very reluctantly lent our Paris Street Rainy Day, which George and Mary made sure was the belle of the ball. And we are all looking forward to his upcoming exhibition devoted to the early and late works of Claude Monet, the first opening in October and the second following in 2018. These will draw heavily from the new technical studies on Monet's works, as well as new databases devoted to the study of 19th century materials and techniques, which brings us to his presence here tonight to be our keynote speaker and to share his thoughts about this exciting new chapter in art history. But before we applause for George, I wanted to invite you all to a reception following George's lecture, which will happen at the grand staircase right outside. Now, please join me in welcoming George.
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you to everybody here who's from Chicago for the loan of the Caillebotte. It was absolutely essential. We really couldn't have done the show without it. I get the strong impression tonight, looking out at the audience, that I am somewhat preaching to the choir, because many of you who have been sitting with us all day long in a wonderful sort of think tank seminar setting, looking and thinking closely about Impressionism and technology. And in fact, some of you will see things that you saw today because many of you in the audience were kind enough to share with me your latest research. Those of you who aren't specialists, this talk was written for you. So I hope that those of you who are experts will enjoy it, and the rest will learn from it too. The exhibition of Van Gogh's bedrooms is a classic kind of exercise for us those of us who still call ourselves connoisseurs. In other words, people who look very, very closely, want to study the object physically, mostly from the front, but sometimes from the back and the side, and who are fundamentally concerned with the physical properties of the works of art and how those properties have to do with what they mean. This has been beautifully explored in Gloria's exhibition, and the occasion for the symposium is really the fact that so much has been thought about and written about Van Gogh's work lately, having to do with issues of technique, with the color of the paintings, with how they were made, with what they were put on, and in what sequence they were actually executed. So this is really the background for my talk tonight. But what I wanted to do was, and what Gloria asked me to do, and you know you don't say no to Gloria, is to look back in a way over what has happened to the relationship between science and conventional art history over the course of a career, my career, which now spans about 35 years. And to think about how it was at the beginning and how it is now. And I can tell you that it is very different, and yet it is mostly different in terms of its sophistication and not always so very different in terms of its goals and aims. When I began working on Degas in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and I'll break here for just a second to say I still remember and will remember it to the day I die, walking into the print room at the Art Institute of Chicago and seeing every drawing by Degas that the Art Institute owns put out for me. I was 25 years old, and I thought, this is dying and going to heaven. With Sam Carini, those of you who knew Sam will know it was a wonderful experience. I began thinking about Degas in the late 70s and did my dissertation on him at Yale, and the whole issue that I wanted to talk about was the relationship between Degas' drawings and his finished works. So that, for instance, you see at the left the dance class from the Musée d'Orsay, and at right you see two of the drawings that figure in it, the dancers figure in it. You can see one of them here in this pose, and the other here primping, sort of adjusting her skirt. And these drawings are from a cache of things that he used to sort of fill out the whole composition. There were drawings also for the dance master, whose name was Jules Perrault, and who is studied here in probably a life drawing from the Ashmolean Museum, the Fitzwilliam Museum, and then here a fantastic sort of gouache peinture à l'essence painted drawing that may well have been posterior to the creation of the canvas itself. We just don't know. I was interested too in the relationship of this canvas to another one very much like it that incorporates some of the same figures. You can get just a couple of them this one here with the blue bow, it keeps wanting to do that, reappears here. So that they too share a kind of vocabulary of dance poses. But then in my work, I came upon this image. It was published in the 1960s, in other words, about 15 years before I discovered it for myself. It wasn't a discovery for the whole world. But it had been published in the Bulletin of the Center for Research of the Museums of France, the laboratory of the Museums of France. And it had been published by them essentially without comment, without interpretation. And there it had sat in this journal, waiting for me. And I thought, oh my God. I had been sort of steeping myself into Gogh and his drawings. I thought, oh my God, I see what's happening underneath the surface of this canvas. Because I could see that not only, just to remind those of you who are not experts, an X-ray is basically when you take a piece of film, you put it behind the image that you want to get a sort of transparent ghost image of. And just like the bones in your hand, the lead white in the paint will block the X-rays and it'll read as white on the eventual canvas. So all of the forms that you see in the X-ray are in fact coming from white or heavy metal base paints. So there in the X-ray I could see Jules Perrault, but I could also see this guy, who is standing just where Perrault is, but this is Perrault's foot, and this is the foot of this man here. And you can see his staff coming down here as well. And then you could also, I was familiar with this work, and I could begin to see on the piano here the fact that this girl was there with her arm here, and her hand coming down to adjust her foot, just there, her ballet slipper. And then I realized that this drawing and these drawings were almost certainly all made on the same day. And they related to each other in terms of the color of the paper. The one at the left at the Metropolitan must have been dearly beloved by Louisine Havemeyer and kept out in her sunny bedroom because it has faded, and the one on the far right at the Fog Art Museum was kept by Paul Sachs in the dark, and it is still very pink. So these three sheets were I believe drawn in the same day from the same model, same bracelet, same necklace, same shoes, same corset. Everything about it is the same, and then they became part of a stash of documents that Degas used to create his work, so that he would then make from this drawing, he would make this painting, and then he could make this painting, and then he could make this painting. And so that X-ray, the discovery of that X-ray for me was a kind of critical moment, because in it I saw what there might be that we still don't understand, or that we then didn't understand about what Degas was doing with making all these drawings and how he might have put them together in an interesting way. X-ray is one of the great techniques for studying the history of art, and not only paintings, but also sculpture can be X-rayed. And here I want to cite the amazing work done at the National Gallery of Art on Degas' waxes, which have all been X-rayed, all the ones that are at the National Gallery. And their interiors analyzed and understood. And here you see the little 14-year-old dancer, the original wax model from the collection of Paul Mellon, now at the National Gallery of Art. And in the center, you see the X-ray created by the scientists and the conservators at the National Gallery. And then at the far right, you see a diagram of all the stuff that's inside this amazing figure. It's very interesting to see all of this because it gives you a sense of the experimentation, the willingness to use that which was at hand, whether it's rope, bits of padding, wires, wood, a whole panoply of materials that form the armature or the basis for which the wax would hold on to and create this extraordinary sculpture. Now, when I started thinking about this, I started thinking, well, you know, if we can look at all of these things, if we can see them as a kind of succession of related works in Degas, what might we do if we could look at them all in a scientific way? And this was made possible in a couple of instances, and unfortunately, I don't have a single picture of any of the X-rays, so you're going to have to believe me. But this is a painting from the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, and it is probably in the earliest phase of Degas' fascination with this very wide representation of a dance class. A deep room, it's basically the canvases are all about twice as wide as they are tall, and they show a group of dancers in the foreground, either at left or right, and an open room behind with windows on the far wall. This one relates to this one, which is very slightly later, and I think probably has two stages of work on the canvas. You can look at this with your naked eye and discern beneath the topmost layer of rather flitting strokes, somewhat smoother and perhaps more concrete forms beneath. Now, my friend and colleague Charlotte Hale, who was working at the National Gallery with me at the time of my exhibition in 1984, did an X-ray of this painting. And beneath it, it was very, very clear there was a painting of at least 10 years earlier, one that looked very much like the Clark Art Institute painting. In other words, very clearly defined shapes, rings and almost down to the ring and the bracelet on the dancer. And also, just here, there was a pole, and there was another dancer standing here or leaning in on this bench, and that pole that you saw in the previous image was here. So here we see him recycling things. And then this painting used to belong to the Art Institute. And I saw it in a private collection in Zurich. It's since come up for auction, and you can see that whoever made this scan took it from one of those wonderful fold-out catalogs that Sotheby's or Christie's has with that. So ignore that line right there, and see that this is basically a painting very much like the ones we've been looking at before, almost exactly like the second one from the Phillips collection. And before they sold the painting, the Art Institute had made an X-ray of it. And I was here in the summer of '84 working with Rick Bertel and Suzanne McCullough on the sort of prepping for their exhibition for, it must have been '83 instead, prepping for their '84 exhibition on Degas in the Art Institute. And we looked at the X-ray of this thing and darned if there wasn't another painting beneath, which was probably 20 years before the surface level that you see now. So we are imagining Degas with this stock of paintings that are all very close to each other, and the X-rays are revealing that that he's taking old things and resurfacing them, basically. And I am convinced that underneath this painting is another picture from the probably the early to mid 1880s. This painting in the Bühler collection in Zurich has, as far as I know, not ever been X-rayed, but when it does, I predict, well, I'll bet you a dinner at the Kronenhalle in Zurich that it is, that there's a picture under there. So X-ray, our friend. X-rays have been around, like you saw in the show of the poor rheumatoid arthritis hand. I see mine glowing right here in front of me. X-rays have been around for a long time and have been appreciated as a means of looking at paintings. There was a man at the Fogg Art Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts, named Alan Burroughs, who was well known for his sort of promulgation of X-rays as a technique that you could use to discover the hidden life of a painting. And it's he who made the upper right-hand corner X-ray of the great Roger van der Weyden St. Luke drawing the Virgin at the National Gallery of Art, the MFA Boston. And the MFA Boston curator was me, and the conservator was Rona Macbeth, who then later took a much better X-ray, the one you see at the left, and was able to suppress through computer manipulation, was able to suppress the lines of the thicker panels of the cradle behind the big wood panel that really disturbed the image at the upper left, which you see bigger here. You can't tell very much about this painting from this X-ray. But even as early as the 1930s, you had this man, Christian Wolters, whose dissertation was written on the subject of using X-rays to understand works of art. And this amazing quotation that he had, the idea of studying both history and science, he said, have never existed before. I was the first art historian who dirtied his fingers as a restorer. For me, it was the close, sensuous, yes, sheer erotic relationship which I have to painting and which was not satisfied by art history alone. I had to go directly to the surface of the paint. My doctoral dissertation had something to do with it. X-ray examination was a step closer into the matter of the picture, a further intensive, sensuous experience. That's not what happens when you break a bone, I don't think. But he understood that the X-ray, the X-radiograph, the photograph made from X-rays was something that would as I've shown you in Degas, lead you to a deeper understanding of what the work of art, how it was made, and what it might mean. Here's a later X-ray, much better, of the Madonna and Child from that picture. And when you superimpose the visible light spectrum over the X-ray and then gradually make the visible spectrum go away, you're able to see how the head of the Virgin has changed. You can see the outlines moving. The head was once slightly further to the right, and now it's slightly further to the left. And the same thing happened when Claire Berry, who's here in the audience, conserved this wonderful Gauguin that the Kimbell Art Museum bought, 15 years ago maybe. And it is a stunning, one of his earliest and best self-portraits. And in doing the X-ray of it, she found that the face of Gauguin had been turned in a completely different direction, and that in the process of finishing the painting, he turned himself into a somewhat more quizzical position. He doesn't look at himself in the mirror as he must have done to paint the picture. Then there is another whole gamut of rays that you can shoot at a painting. And here I borrowed this illustration from a book, needless to say, I didn't make it myself. But it gives you, starting at the lower right, it gives you, and at the lower left of this panoply, it gives you, this is what you can see with the naked eye. This is what you can see if you are looking at it with your naked eye but are shining an ultraviolet light on it, a black light. Here's a photograph taken with that black light. Here's a photograph taken with a digital image and with an infrared. This is something I'll come back to in a moment, which is called a false color infrared. Then back up here, another different kind of infrared, and here the back, and here the back of the piece. So this is just a way to show you that there are all kinds of different ways of addressing this, this problem of how to look at a picture. And the first time I ever heard of an infrared reflectograph was when a woman named Molly Ferries, who taught at the University of Indiana, came to Houston, Texas, where I was then the curator, in order to photograph or to examine all of our early Netherlandish paintings. A painting that was supposed to be by Roger van der Weyden, probably isn't, Jos van Cleve, Matthijs, etc. And she lugged along with her this camera. You can see the camera. We didn't have to have quite so extensive a setup because our paintings weren't that tall. But there's a camera up here, and then it's connected down here to basically a TV screen. And instead of taking a picture of the thing directly, you're looking at a video image of it. The machine was called a Vidicon, and you could take photographs of the computer screen, basically, and then put them together into a kind of a mosaic and get an image of what was beneath the surface that was like a drawing beneath, an underdrawing. Anything that was dark, carbon-rich would show up on this infrared technology. Now, this then became, particularly for the study of Northern art, one of the great techniques. And here's an early mosaic of pictures taken from the camera, and here a much more sophisticated rendering of the same idea with, you can see the baby's hands moving back and forth as the composition was elaborated. And then similarly, as you use X-ray in combination with the visible spectrum, you can do the same thing with an infrared and then see how eventually how the paint layers are put up on top of the drawing. This is just to show, this is a painting from the Kimbell by an still unidentified artist, a painting of very, very high quality, which represents a man named Obrecht, who was the choir master at Ghent. And here are sort of 3 generations of infrared photographs of the picture. One from a Vidicon at the far left, one taken, I think, in 2005 with a very good camera, one taken in 2012, I believe, with a better camera still. And then John Delaney, who is here today, has taken even better images of it. We just haven't seen them yet, John. And so I couldn't include them in my talk. But John was busy doing other things because he was here in Chicago working with the staff at the Art Institute of Chicago on their amazing painting by Gustav Caillebotte. Now, I want to call your attention here to this thing I mentioned in passing here, infrared false color. Now, the false color is basically where John's camera is super duper, and it can see all kinds of layers that everyone else's camera can't see. And by isolating these and combining them into cocktails, basically you can get an image that is very revealing and can help you understand what things are happening beneath the visible surface of the painting. So here's the painting. Faye Rubel, who's also here, cleaned it, revealing its much more sophisticated and nuanced surface. And then here is a false color image of it. This is actually just like the old pictures, which were literally cut up pieces of paper glued together. This is basically a whole mass of digital images, which are put together by the miracle of the computer, and can give you this image where basically in these turquoise patches and the patches of red. You're seeing different kinds of chemical pigments that are being used in the painting. And then Kelly Keegan, working with the rest of the conservation staff in the department here, figured out that through this she could really see the evidence of the perspective schema that Caillebotte adopted to give you this sense of being out on the street with this man and this woman in early 1877 or late 1876. Now, so we've gotten what I'd call super duper. But sometimes it's good to go back to the physical thing just in the way that you can almost kind of hold it in your hand, to use your eyes, perhaps with great magnification or with a different kind of lighting source, to look at the thing in a sort of plain way again. In terms of Impressionism, I think one of the most important steps in acculturing art historians to the role in which conservation and conservation science could be critical to understanding the work of art was this exhibition, Art in the Making, Impressionism, which, if I'm not wrong, was, I believe, the first of a series of exhibitions that the National Gallery in London organized and are still organizing about how art is actually made. The Impressionism one came along in 1990 and was, I think, really revelatory. Still the book that that you see the front cover of here is still a book that people go back to, and it's a great introduction to the problems of looking at Impressionist paintings. It predates all of the super duper fancy dancy infrared reflectograph research, so they could do it over again with even more different and newer technologies. But still, there's something really key about it. They took, for instance, their great Pissarro and not only looked at it in an X-ray, but also in a Raking light photograph. The Raking light photograph is simply a record of what you could see with your own eyes if you managed to get close enough to the picture and see how light fell across the deeply textured surface of the painting. It makes you realize that the book is never, ever a substitute for the physical encounter with the three-dimensional object. Many of you here were students, and certainly everyone I hope was an admirer of John Brealey, whose statement was always, remember that paintings are extremely low relief sculpture. And there is something to be remembered in that in fact the surface, the physical presence of the surface is really critically important. And so here you see a Raking light photograph of Camille Monet on the beach at Trouville, painted in 1870 in the summer when he and Camille were on their honeymoon. Probably Madame Boudin sitting next to Camille. And there, a Raking light photograph to give you some sense of the sort of texture of the paint, which sometimes clings to the surface of the canvas and the threads of the canvas, and other times, like in the impasto, is simply sitting on top, standing up proud of the actual surface. And this is one of the most wonderful things that they revealed in 1990, was through macrophotography, or I hope I've got that word right. I'm still a little bit of a neophyte. Through highly magnified photography, they were able to see in the paint traces of the sand from the beach where the painting was actually made. And so you can even tell that there was some sand in the paint here when this blob of white, this stroke of white was laid down. That black line is actually the shadow of a ledge of white paint that you see going up there. And so some of the little bits of sand are underneath that white, some on top. And then if you look carefully, you can see the little gaps where there was sand in the paint It dried, and the little bits of sand have dropped out, so they're little pits in the surface of the white paint as well. This is some proof of plein air painting, if you ask me. Sitting there on the beach with the blowing sand. In fact, this study of paint and the actual surface of the paint is something that still very, very much intrigues me and is one of the things I most like to do. I stole this out of a book too, but it was particularly good because it's the painting from the Art Institute, Why Are You Angry? And here you see a section of the painting, and you can see how the ground was applied, this very roughly textured ground done by him in Tahiti in this series of paintings that he makes on a very large scale, a group of 6 of them that he sends back to Paris in advance of his great painting, Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And also, I loved this because this little detail of an iris from down here in the painting showed you that he's working on this lower quadrant of the picture, and as he's making these wonderful swooping lines of the iris stems and leaves, he decides that at the bottom there needs to be something else. And so quite right over the preliminary stroke of one of the stalks of iris, he paints the iris flower. The process of watching a painting be cleaned is also, for the curator, one of the most glorious that there ever is. And this is an image that Anne Honigswald, who is here, also sent me of a painting at the National Gallery of Art before and after cleaning. And I particularly loved this gigantic detail that she sent. And here you get a strong sense, this has been beautifully lit before it was photographed, so that you get a sense of the painting standing up, the paint standing up on the surface of the canvas. And here, as you will hear tomorrow, are patches of something which was undoubtedly pinker, which has turned more purple as the red has gone out of it, and color shifts in Van Gogh's paintings. In fact, this has become a topic of great interest, and the exhibition upstairs in the galleries gives you a wonderful opportunity to study 3 paintings that unfortunately have faded. In the catalog, you'll see what we think they looked like originally, and we get details of this when we unframe a painting and see, for instance, here on the National Gallery self-portrait from the Whitney collection, the violet edge at the top, which led to eventually a recolorization of the painting on computer, not in reality, I hasten to say. And you can get the same thing on this Van Gogh, where the turnover edge of the painting, which has always been in the dark, was bright pink, giving you a sense of how bright and vivid the background used to be. There is the National Gallery self-portrait in a proposal for what it might have looked like, directly reflecting Van Gogh's description of it when he wrote to his brother that it was violet and yellow and had a color effect, as he said. Close looking can lead you to understand a lot of things. And here, I saw this for the first time in the Berceuse by Van Gogh at the MFA Boston, but up under a heavily impasted stroke, you can see a tiny little line where basically the paint has always been in its own shadow. And do you see how it's vaguely pink right there? Well, that's a remnant of the pink color that was once in this painting, now of white roses. This is a screenshot from an absolutely fantastic YouTube demonstration that I urge you, if you're not a specialist, even if you are a specialist and haven't seen it yet, you must watch it. of the work that was done by our friends at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the show that they held in 2015, I believe, of Van Gogh's Irises and Lilies. And almost everybody who was involved with this project is here tonight, including Susan Stein, the curator of the exhibition, and Charlotte Hale, who directed the research of many people, I think, working with her. And they went back to old reproductions of this painting as a source of ideas for how the painting might originally have been colored. And sometimes the inclination was simply to turn all the roses pink. But in fact, they could see from the old reproductions that it wasn't necessarily quite so obvious, and that in the 20s and the 30s, the bouquet was rendered with varying shades of pink and white, sometimes yellow in the picture, and using highly scientific techniques of, I believe this is XRF, am I correct? It's basically looking at the paint and telling you where certain pigments used to be. They could recolor the picture. And here is the recolored version. Again, a proposal of what it must have looked like, what it might have looked like. It mustn't be confused with what the painting looks like now, but it gives us a new understanding of what Van Gogh meant when he wrote to his brother about these studies in color that were blue against pink and bright green against pink, and this one is perhaps the least changed of them all, the yellow and blue one at the far left. But here you can see how, if this is what they look like, this is what they look like now, and they are incredibly beautiful, but still we have to understand that they're but shadows of their former selves. Now, Harriet Stratus here sent me, that wasn't supposed to happen that way. That's very interesting. Harriet sent me this fantastic image of a drawing that looks like this now. It's a drawing clipped from a sketchbook by Gauguin, drawn in Tahiti with fairly cheap ink on also relatively cheap paper. The cheap ink, has any of you seen something that you signed with a felt tip pen about 20 years ago and how the felt tip ink is almost entirely gone? Well, this is what has happened to this ink, which was originally a rather vivid purple, and which the conservators here have recolored painstakingly to give us some sense of what the drawing must have looked like in its original. From the very surface of things, we can turn to the support. And here is a painting that was done on paper in the 1840s. As you can see, it's signed from his trip to Rome. And it was sometime later put on a canvas and stretched onto a stretcher. And I am absolutely delighted that my colleague from Paris, Pascal, was willing to share these slides with me. Almost everything I'm showing you comes from somebody else. I want to credit them entirely. And this painting by Troyon of cows resting bears a confusing number of stamps on the back, which still all have to be interpreted. Here is the stamp of the dealer Durand Ruel, which has been put on top of the dealer from, I think it's Deforges, who was the actual maker of the canvas. And Pascal Labroche, as I said, has now created this wonderful website where everyone who has a 19th century French painting, basically it's between the 18th century and about 1960, can go and post all of the markings that are on their paintings. Claire, Barry, and I said, we've got work to do. We're going to go home and photograph the backs of all of our French paintings and put them on the website so that we can learn more through a kind of crowdsourcing of information, that literally as people feed more and more information to this, not only will they learn about their own pictures, but also they will enrich the database so that future generations, only a couple of years from now, will nonetheless be able to learn more. It's a bit like Ancestry.com, where as you fill in your own family, someone else can understand where theirs came from as well. And you do this by filling in and putting in here uploading basically an image of your painting. Now, Kim Muir shared these wonderful slides with me, also from the Art Institute of Chicago, when they were working on the summary catalog of paintings by Monet in the Art Institute. They made numerous discoveries, and this is simply one that gets you in the mood for what you might have found out when you can read this online in the Art Institute website. They knew from a tracing that had been made of the back of this painting before it was lined some time ago, that it was made by Trois Gros, which is a furnisher of canvases. And they took a picture of it from the back using infrared transmitted light photographs, and there they discovered the outline of the cliffs at Étretat. You can see them here, that are visible here. There's the needle rock on this side of the poplar, and there is the gate, the so-called porte that you see here. So then the subject also came up with the canvas, because this painting of Étretat must have been made in the 1870s or early 1880s, and this painting was from 1891, so he was basically recycling a canvas. And in fact, this fit in with their research, because these paintings from the 1880s were all painted on very similar canvases, perhaps cut from the same roll of cloth. You can see this is an image of the lines of the canvas, highly computerized, made from X-radiographs of each canvas, that then the warp threads of the fabric itself were isolated, and there is a whole new science in this counting of threads. And they found that this painting, they all share similar grounds, that this painting, in terms of its weave count, is absolutely consistent with a painting from the mid-1880s. So probably, and might well even come from the same delivery of canvases cut from the same bolt. Now, this study of thread counts began here at the Art Institute of Chicago in cooperation with the Van Gogh Museum, when this museum and the Van Gogh Museum organized in 2001 Van Gogh Gauguin, the Studio of the South. I hope all of you remember that fantastic exhibition. And the conservators here and on the other side of the Atlantic in Amsterdam began to take X-radiographs of the paintings that we knew that Van Gogh painted while in Arles and the ones that Gauguin painted while they were in Arles, and see if they could match them up and see if anything about their thread count and the cloth that they were actually painted on would lead us to new understanding of their sequencing and of their relationships to each other. This has now become the absolute specialty of a group of people who are worldwide counting threads. They are taking X-ray after X-ray after X-ray, feeding them into computers, and with these amazing logarithms, pulling together disparate pictures from far and wide, really, and putting them together and learning where they were, where the painting fell on the bolt of canvas. And so here I give you the reconstitution of a bolt of canvas that was begun to be used in Arles by Van Gogh. And most of the paintings that you see on this half of the canvas were made in Arles, but some of them were made the next year in Saint-Rémy, here and here. And indeed, it goes on and on and on. And there's the full bolt. And they've done the same thing. Here again are the warp threads all lining up with all of these paintings of a similar format that were made in Saint-Rémy towards the end of Van Gogh's life. Now, today we have been going through all of these kinds of exercises of looking at the science of pictures. And the thing I want to say is that we must not get too excited about our toys. There is a strong tendency to do research for the purpose of the research almost. I don't think this is true of the people who are here, because I think all of their research is actually towards understanding the works of art more greatly. But the challenge is for the curator, if you will, for the person who's going to write old-fashioned art history, to take the discoveries that have been made through technical examination and interpret them and say, what does it mean? What are the things that we can learn from this? And tonight I have the great privilege of announcing a brand new discovery. An X-ray was recently taken of Gauguin's Where Do We Come From, What Are We, Where Are We Going at the MFA Boston. And this X-radiograph has revealed remarkable new discoveries. For beneath the surface of the canvas, there are figures that have never been recognized before and lead us to a greater interpretation of Gauguin's meaning. The figure on the left rather, is strangely familiar. And the figure on the right is the one who I think we can most identify. It's that luxuriant head of hair, reminding you first of Jane Morris, then perhaps of the Countess Castiglione. But no, I think it's this lady. Maybe Misia Natanson, but the hair's too neat for Misia, or Misia's hair is too neat for this. No, I think it might be this beauty. This beauty who, in this photograph, Miss Camille Clifford, the original Gibson girl. I think my chronology may be a bit off here, but I think this is who it must be. And we must understand that Gauguin found Camille Clifford, who later was to become a Marchioness, while he was in Auckland, New Zealand, on his way to Tahiti for the first time. Must have picked up an illustrated sort of version of Tatler, 1897. So there, you'll remember that it was on the 1st of April, 2016, that you learned this thing, and I hope that you will treasure it in your heart for years to come. Thank you very much.
And to think I invited George for a reason. Well, this is an intimate group, and I hope you'll join us now and we can have an intimate drink.